You remember what you had for breakfast yesterday, or you think you do. But right now, as your brain retrieves that memory, it's also tracking these words, maintaining awareness of your surroundings, and running a dozen background processes you're not even conscious of. Every one of these operations draws from overlapping mental resources, and when those systems become overloaded, even the simplest tasks become surprisingly difficult. What feels like a personal failing is actually your working memory hitting a hard biological limit. Most people think difficulty is inherent to the task itself. A tax form is hard because taxes are complicated. Learning to drive is hard because coordination is complex. But this intuitive model misses something crucial. Why does checking email sometimes feel effortless and other times feel like wading through mud? Why can a professional chef prepare a 5-course meal while chatting with friends, but a novice cook burns toast while trying to follow a simple recipe? The seductive explanation is that we're tired, distracted, or simply having an off day. Sometimes that's true. But cognitive psychologist John Sweller discovered something more systematic beginning in the 1980s at the University of New South Wales. He was studying why students struggled with seemingly straightforward math problems, and what he found challenged our basic assumptions about human learning and performance. Sweller realized that what we call simple or complex isn't just about the task, it's about the interaction between the task and our mental architecture. The human brain has a fundamental bottleneck. Working memory can only hold and manipulate a limited amount of information simultaneously. This isn't a design flaw or something we can easily overcome through practice alone. It's a fundamental constraint, like the bandwidth of an internet connection. But consider this, that same person who struggles to remember a 7-digit phone number can effortlessly recall thousands of chess positions if they're an expert player. The difference isn't memory capacity, it's how information gets organized and stored. This insight helped establish cognitive load theory, and it explains why simple tasks often aren't simple at all. Think of your working memory as a small desk where you do all your conscious thinking. This desk has limited space. You can only spread out so many papers at once. When cognitive scientists measure this capacity precisely, they find it's remarkably small. Most people can actively hold around 4 distinct pieces of information, though this varies between individuals and depends on the type of information. Now imagine 3 different scenarios at this desk. In the first, you're trying to solve a genuinely difficult puzzle. Say, figuring out your taxes. The complexity comes from the problem itself. Multiple income sources, various deductions, changing tax laws. This is what Sweller called intrinsic cognitive load, APQA, the mental effort that comes from the inherent difficulty of the task. You can't eliminate this load, you can only manage it by breaking the problem into smaller pieces. In the second scenario, you're trying to solve a simple math problem, but someone has written the instructions in tiny, faded text scattered across multiple pages in random order. The math itself isn't hard, but now you're burning mental energy just trying to decode the presentation. This is extraneous cognitive load, as you just said, the mental effort wasted on poor design rather than the actual task. Unlike intrinsic load, this type is largely under our control, though completely eliminating it can be challenging. The third scenario is different. You're working through that same math problem, but now you're not just solving it, you're beginning to recognize the underlying pattern. You're building what psychologists call a schema, a mental framework that will make similar problems easier in the future. This productive mental effort is germane cognitive load, though it's the good kind of thinking that builds expertise. These 3 types of load are additive. Your working memory desk doesn't care whether information comes from a hard problem, poor design, or productive learning. It all takes up the same limited space. When the total load exceeds your capacity, performance degrades rapidly. You start making errors, forgetting steps, or simply giving up. But there is a remarkable exception to this rule, discovered through decades of research on expertise. When information becomes deeply familiar, when it gets compiled into what cognitive scientists call automated schemas, it essentially disappears from working memory. A chess grandmaster doesn't see individual pieces scattered across the board, they see familiar patterns and configurations, each recognized pattern counting as a single unit in working memory. This is why that professional chef can prepare complex meals while carrying on conversations. The basic techniques, dicing onions, adjusting seasoning, managing multiple burners, have become automated through thousands of hours of practice. They're no longer conscious operations competing for working memory space. Meanwhile, the novice cook burns toast because they're consciously monitoring the toaster while trying to remember recipe steps while figuring out which pan to use. Three separate demands on the same limited system. Research by cognitive psychologist Anders Ericsson and his colleagues showed this pattern across domains. Expert radiologists can spot subtle abnormalities in x rays while discussing weekend plans because pattern recognition has become automated. Expert drivers navigate complex traffic while listening to podcasts because basic vehicle control no longer requires conscious attention. The transformation from effortful to automatic isn't just about speed, it fundamentally changes what counts as simple. A task that overwhelms a beginner's working memory becomes trivial for an expert, not because experts are smarter, but because expertise reorganizes how information gets processed. But cognitive load theory isn't as straightforward as it first appears, and recent research has revealed important limitations and complexities. The replication crisis has touched this field too, with some classic findings proving less robust than originally thought. The famous 7 plus or minus 2 rule for working memory capacity, established by psychologist George Miller at Harvard in 1956, has been refined significantly. Modern research by Nelson Cowan at the University of Missouri suggests the true capacity is closer to 4 chunks, not 7, but even this depends heavily on the type of information and how it's organized. Working memory for spatial information operates differently than memory for verbal information, and individual differences are substantial. The boundaries between the 3 types of cognitive load also blur in practice. What starts as extraneous load, struggling with a poorly designed interface, can sometimes become germane load if it forces you to think more deeply about the underlying problem. Conversely, what seems like productive germane load can become extraneous if it's not relevant to your actual goals. Clinical populations reveal additional complexities. People with ADHD often have working memory deficits, but they also show unusual patterns of cognitive load distribution. Sometimes they perform better under higher cognitive load conditions, possibly because the additional demands help focus their attention. Individuals on the autism spectrum may have different load sensitivities, with some showing remarkable abilities to process certain types of complex information while struggling with seemingly simple social or sensory demands. Age adds another layer of complication. Older adults typically show reduced working memory capacity, but they also have vastly more automated schemas built up over decades of experience. A 70-year-old accountant might struggle to learn new software but can spot financial irregularities that escape younger colleagues entirely. Recent neuroscience research has also complicated our understanding of where cognitive load lives in the brain. It's not simply a matter of the prefrontal cortex getting overloaded. Different types of cognitive load activate different neural networks, and the brain has various strategies for managing competing demands. Some conscious, others automatic. Perhaps most importantly, we're still learning about the relationship between cognitive load and motivation. When people are deeply engaged with material they find meaningful, they can sustain higher cognitive loads for longer periods. The load itself may be the same, but the subjective experience of difficulty changes dramatically. Understanding cognitive load theory changes how you should think about your daily struggles with seemingly simple tasks. That overwhelming feeling when you're trying to follow GPS directions while driving in an unfamiliar city isn't a personal weakness. It's 2 complex tasks competing for the same limited mental resources. The solution isn't to try harder, it's to reduce the load. This has practical implications for how you approach learning and work. When you're acquiring a new skill, focus on building one component at a time until it becomes automatic. If you're learning a musical instrument, practice scales until your fingers know them without conscious thought before attempting complex pieces. If you're mastering a new software tool, automate the basic operations before trying advanced features. Pay attention to extraneous load in your environment. That cluttered desk, the notifications pinging constantly, the poorly organized files on your computer. They're all stealing mental resources from your actual work. The most productive people aren't necessarily smarter, they're often just better at eliminating unnecessary cognitive demands. Recognize that your cognitive load capacity fluctuates throughout the day and depends on your physical and emotional state. Stress, fatigue, and even hunger reduce your working memory capacity. Schedule your most cognitively demanding tasks for when you're at your best, and build in buffers for the times when simple tasks feel harder than they should. When you're teaching others or designing processes, remember that what seems obvious to you may be overwhelming to someone else. Your expertise has automated many steps that beginners must handle consciously. Break complex procedures into smaller chunks. Eliminate unnecessary decisions and provide clear examples rather than abstract explanations. Most importantly, be patient with yourself when simple tasks feel difficult. Your brain is doing something remarkable, managing multiple streams of information, maintaining awareness of your environment, and constantly learning from experience. The fact that this system has limits isn't a bug, it's a feature that forces us to become more efficient and organized over time. The next time a simple task feels unexpectedly difficult, remember that simplicity isn't about the task. It's about the relationship between the task and your mental resources at that moment. Your working memory is a small, precious space where all conscious thinking happens. When that space fills up, even easy things become hard, but understanding this limit is the first step to working with it, rather than against it. The goal isn't to push through cognitive overload, it's to recognize it and respond intelligently. Sometimes that means breaking tasks into smaller pieces, sometimes it means eliminating distractions, and sometimes it just means accepting that your brain is already doing more than you realize.